Down to her last $1,000 and facing eviction after being laid off from her teaching job, Olivia Reynolds made a desperate decision to buy an abandoned farmhouse at a county auction that no one else wanted. What she discovered hidden beneath the floorboards would not only change her life forever, but would uncover a political secret that had been concealed for over 50 years, one that would bring the president's Secret Service agents to her door. At dawn, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia Reynolds stared at her bank account balance on her phone screen, 1,243.76. Just 2 years ago, she had been a dedicated high school history teacher with a modest apartment, reliable health insurance, and enough savings to feel secure. Now at 34, she was living in her cousin's spare bedroom, showering at odd hours to avoid inconveniencing her hosts and counting every penny with growing desperation. The education budget cuts had devastated her small town of Mapleton. Olivia's position teaching American history had been eliminated, along with dozens of others, leaving her scrambling for substitute teaching gigs that barely covered groceries. She'd applied for positions in neighboring districts, but with schools everywhere tightening their belts, the market was flooded with experienced teachers just like her. "You're too idealistic, Liv," her father had told her during their last conversation. "Move to the city where there are more opportunities, or go into corporate training. Teaching isn't a stable career anymore." But Olivia couldn't imagine doing anything else. History wasn't just her subject, it was her passion, her purpose. The thought of abandoning it for a corporate job made her physically ill. As she sat in her cousin's kitchen, scrolling through increasingly depressing job listings, she noticed a small advertisement in the local county paper's online auction section. Historic Whitfield Farm property, abandoned, rehabilitation required, minimum bid, $1,000. The listing showed a weathered 2-story farmhouse with a sagging porch, broken windows, and an overgrown yard. According to the description, the property had been seized for back taxes and had stood empty for nearly a decade. Olivia had grown up in Mapleton, familiar with the old Whitfield place on the outskirts of town. As a child, she had bicycled past it on summer days, making up stories about who might have lived there. Local rumors claimed it had once been a stop on the Underground Railroad, though she'd never found historical evidence to support this. The house had been abandoned for as long as she could remember, a ghostly reminder of the town's more prosperous past. The auction was scheduled for the following morning. Olivia spent a sleepless night weighing her options. The rational part of her brain screamed that buying a dilapidated farmhouse with her last $1,000 was financial suicide. There would be repairs, taxes, insurance, and countless other expenses she couldn't afford. But another part, the part that had always believed in history's importance and the value of preservation, whispered that this might be her only chance to own a piece of the past, to have something that was truly hers when everything else had been taken away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By dawn, she had made up her mind. If nothing else, the house would provide shelter if her cousin eventually needed the spare room back. Worst case, she could sell it when the market improved. Property in their rural county was cheap, but land always had some value. The county courthouse was nearly empty when Olivia arrived for the auction. Property sales like this rarely drew crowds in Mapleton, especially in the current economy. The Whitfield farm was the last item on the docket, and when the auctioneer called for bids, Olivia was the only one to raise her hand. $1,000 from Ms. Reynolds, the auctioneer announced, seeming eager to conclude the proceedings. Going once, going twice, sold to Ms. Reynolds. As Olivia signed the paperwork and transferred nearly every dollar from her account, The county clerk, Mrs. Harmon, gave her a concerned look. Olivia had been one of her daughter's teachers before the layoffs. "You know, Miss Reynolds, there's a reason no one wanted that place," she said quietly, sliding the deed across the counter. "The Whitfield farm has been nothing but trouble for years. Strange noises, lights seen in the windows when no one's supposed to be there. Some say old man Whitfield was involved in government business back in the day, classified stuff. Not that I believe in those ghost stories," she added quickly. "But that house has a history most folks around here prefer to avoid." Olivia forced a smile. "As a history teacher, Mrs. Harmon, history is exactly what I'm looking for." But as she drove the 5 miles to her new property, doubt began to creep in. What had she done? She knew nothing about home restoration, had no budget for repairs, and might have just thrown away her last financial lifeline on a decaying structure that could collapse around her. When she finally turned onto the long gravel driveway, the reality of her purchase hit her full force. The farmhouse stood on a small rise, silhouetted against the late morning sun, looking even more desolate than in the photos. The once white clapboard was now a weathered grey, with patches missing entirely. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side. Several windows were boarded up, while others had been broken by vandals or storms and left open to the elements. "Oh, what have I gotten myself into?" she whispered as she parked her aging Honda and stepped out, the spring mud sucking at her sneakers. Around the house, about 2 acres of overgrown fields stretched out, bordered by dense woods on 2 sides. A collapsing barn stood at the edge of the property, its roof partially caved in. An old well, its stone sides crumbling, sat halfway between the house and barn. Despite the dilapidation, there was something undeniably charming about the place. Or perhaps that was just Olivia desperately trying to justify her impulsive purchase. Taking a deep breath, she climbed the creaking porch steps and tried the front door. It was locked, but the key the county clerk had given her turned smoothly in the ancient mechanism. The door swung open with a dramatic groan that would have been at home in any haunted house film. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like macabre decorations, and the wooden floorboards protested beneath her feet. Surprisingly, some furniture remained. A moth-eaten sofa in what must have been the living room, a dining table with 3 mismatched chairs, and various other abandoned pieces throughout the house. The first floor contained a large living room, a formal dining room, a kitchen with ancient appliances, and a small study. The kitchen was in dire shape, with cabinets hanging off their hinges and a sink so rusted it looked dangerous to touch. The study was the most intact room, with built-in bookshelves covering one wall, though they stood empty aside from a few mouldering encyclopedias. Olivia shined her phone's flashlight up the narrow staircase that led to the second floor. The steps didn't look entirely stable, but her curiosity outweighed caution. Carefully testing each step, she made her way upstairs to find 4 bedrooms and a bathroom, with a clawfoot tub that might once have been luxurious, but now was stained with rust and grime. The largest bedroom, presumably the master, contained a metal bed frame with no mattress and a solid oak dresser. The other rooms were mostly empty, though one contained a child's rocking chair that sent an involuntary shiver down Olivia's spine. "Definitely need to get the electricity turned on," she muttered to herself, trying to break the eerie silence. Her voice sounded strange in the empty house, as if the walls were absorbing the sound. Too exhausted to explore further, Olivia returned to her car to retrieve the sleeping bag, battery-powered lantern, and small cooler of food she had brought. She set up camp in the study, which seemed the least damaged room, and had the advantage of being on the first floor in case any part of the second story decided to collapse during the night. As darkness fell, the house came alive with sounds, creaking timbers, scurrying creatures in the walls, and the whistle of wind through broken windows. Olivia lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling and questioning every life choice that had led her to this moment. Her teaching career had been her identity for so long that losing it felt like losing herself. This house represented something concrete, something she could rebuild just as she hoped to rebuild her life. But in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, the task ahead seemed insurmountable. Morning came with shafts of sunlight streaming through the broken shutters, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. Olivia woke stiff and cold, but with a renewed sense of determination. She had made her choice, spent her money, and now she had to make it work. After a breakfast of granola bars and lukewarm coffee from her thermos, she set out to properly assess her new property in daylight. The house was in bad shape, certainly, but not beyond saving. The foundation seemed solid, and the roof, while in need of repairs, hadn't completely failed. The bones of the place were good, as her grandfather would have said. The real challenges would be the electrical system, which appeared to date from the 1950s, and the plumbing, which had likely frozen and burst multiple times during vacant winters. But with YouTube tutorials and time, those were problems she could tackle gradually. The immediate priority was making one room truly habitable. By midday, Olivia had cleared enough debris from the study to create a reasonable living space. She swept away decades of dust, hung a sheet over the broken window to keep out the draft, and arranged her meager belongings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The kitchen would be her next project. The water was still turned off, but she found an old hand pump at the sink that, after considerable effort and WD-40, she managed to get working. The water came out brown at first, but eventually ran clear. It wasn't potable without boiling, but it would serve for cleaning. As she scrubbed years of grime from the kitchen counters, Olivia found herself imagining the history of the house. The families that had gathered in this kitchen, the meals prepared, the conversations shared. Had children done homework at this table while their mother cooked dinner? Had the family celebrated holidays here, the room filled with laughter and warmth? She was so lost in these thoughts that she almost missed the odd sound her scrub brush made when it passed over a certain section of the wooden floor, a hollow echo different from the solid thunk of the surrounding boards. Curious, she knelt down and examined the area more closely. The floorboard in question looked like all the others, weathered oak, darkened with age and use. But when she pressed on one end, the opposite end lifted slightly, revealing a small gap. Excitement coursed through her veins as she worked her fingers into the opening and lifted. The board came away easily, as if it had been designed to be removed. Beneath it was a small, hollow space, and inside a metal box about the size of a hardcover book. Olivia lifted it out, surprised by its weight. It was made of steel, tarnished but intact, with no visible lock or opening mechanism. She turned it over in her hands, looking for a way in, and noticed a small indentation on the bottom, not a keyhole, but a pressure point. When she pressed it, the top of the box clicked open. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded cloth, was a leather-bound journal, a small stack of yellowed envelopes tied with twine, and something that made Olivia's blood run cold. A White House security badge dated 1967 with the name Margaret Whitfield, and a black and white photo of a young woman with a striking resemblance to Olivia herself. Hands trembling, Olivia opened the journal. The handwriting inside was elegant but urgent, the entries spanning from January 1967 to November 1968. She flipped through, catching fragments. January 15th, 1967, first day at the White House. Still can't believe I'm here. The president nodded to me in the hallway. I nearly fainted. March 3rd, 1967, overheard conversation between P and McNamara. Not meant for my ears, must be more careful. August 17th, 1967. The tapes are becoming a burden. So much knowledge not meant for a secretary. What would happen if people knew? The last entry caught Olivia's eye. November 22nd, 1968. They know I've been listening. Not safe in DC anymore. Going home to the farm. Buried everything where no one would think to look. If found, this journal will explain why I did what I did. The tapes tell the truth about Vietnam, about the '64 campaign, about everything. History deserves honesty. Olivia's mind reeled. Margaret Whitfield, presumably the last owner of the house, had been a White House secretary during the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, and apparently she had secretly recorded conversations that were never meant to be heard. Conversations about Vietnam, about the election, about everything. The implications were staggering. If these tapes existed, if they contained what Margaret claimed they did, they could potentially rewrite portions of American history. But where were they now? Margaret wrote that she had buried everything. But where? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Olivia noticed a folded paper tucked into the back cover of the journal. Unfolding it revealed a hand-drawn map of the property with X marks at various locations. At the bottom was written, "The full truth lies beneath where the Founding Fathers would approve. Freedom rings when no one can hear it." A riddle. Of course it would be a riddle. Olivia spent the remainder of the day poring over the journal and letters. The correspondence was primarily between Margaret and her sister, detailing her growing concern about what she was witnessing in the White House. According to the letters, Margaret had been assigned to transcribe routine meetings, but had secretly begun recording others when she became concerned about discrepancies between what was said privately and what was told to the American people about the Vietnam War. As daylight faded, Olivia reluctantly set the documents aside. She needed to make her sleeping area more secure and find something for dinner. The implications of what she had found could wait until morning. That night, as she lay in her sleeping bag listening to the house settle around her, Olivia couldn't quiet her racing thoughts. She had stumbled upon what could be a significant historical discovery, primary source material from one of the most tumultuous periods in modern American politics. As a history teacher, she understood the value of such documents, but she also recognized the potential danger. If Margaret Whitfield had been right to flee Washington, if powerful people had wanted these recordings suppressed 5 decades ago, would they still care today? The rational part of her brain said no. Most of the key figures were long dead. The Vietnam War was ancient history to her students, and whatever political scandals the tapes contained would be footnotes compared to more recent controversies. But another part, the part that had spent years impressing upon teenagers the ongoing relevance of historical events, wasn't so sure. Olivia dreamed of White House corridors that night, of hidden microphones and shadowy figures pursuing a woman who looked disturbingly like herself. She woke repeatedly, startled by the normal sounds of an old house at night, suddenly transformed in her imagination to footsteps of unknown intruders. When dawn finally broke, she was already awake. Margaret's journal opened beside her as she tried to decipher the clue about the Founding Fathers and freedom ringing. The property map showed several X marks, one near the well, one in what appeared to be the northeast corner of the barn, one in the root cellar beneath the house, and one on the edge of the woods. After a quick breakfast, Olivia decided to start with the most accessible location, the root cellar. The entrance was through a heavy wooden door in the kitchen floor, nearly hidden under a faded linoleum rug she had rolled back during yesterday's cleaning. The hinges protested loudly as she lifted the door, revealing a set of steep stone steps descending into darkness. With her flashlight in hand, Olivia carefully made her way down. The cellar was surprisingly large, extending beyond the kitchen, to encompass much of the house's footprint. Stone walls and earthen floor kept the space cool and damp. Wooden shelves lined the walls, still holding ancient preserving jars with unidentifiable contents. According to Margaret's map, the X was in the northeast corner. Olivia made her way there, examining the area carefully. Unlike the rest of the cellar, this corner had a section of brick flooring, about 4 feet square. The bricks were arranged in a deliberate pattern, 13 in a circle, with one in the center. 13 original colonies, Olivia murmured. The history teacher in her immediately recognizing the symbolism. The founding fathers would approve. She knelt down and pressed on the center brick. Nothing happened. She tried lifting it, but it remained firmly in place. Frustrated, she sat back on her heels, considering the riddle again. Freedom rings when no one can hear it. The Liberty Bell. Freedom ringing. But the Liberty Bell was famously cracked, silent. No one could hear it ring. Olivia examined the circle of bricks again and noticed a hairline crack in one of them. She pressed it, and to her amazement, it sank slightly into the floor. There was a mechanical click, and the center brick loosened. Heart pounding, she lifted the center brick to reveal a small cavity containing another metal box, larger than the first. This one had a combination lock, 3 dials with numbers 09. What would the combination be? July 4th, 1776. The date of the Declaration of Independence. No, that would be a 6-digit number. Perhaps 1776? She tried turning the dials. 1776. Nothing. Olivia sat back thinking. If Margaret had been concerned enough to hide these materials, she would have used a combination she could remember, but others wouldn't easily guess. Something personal, but connected to her work. On a hunch, Olivia retrieved the White House ID badge from upstairs. Margaret's employee number was printed in the corner, 1235. Worth a try. She dialed the numbers, and the lock clicked open. Inside the box were 5 reel-to-reel audio tapes, carefully labeled with dates and cryptic notations. Also in the box was a folded document that appeared to be official White House stationery, with what looked like signatures at the bottom. As Olivia carefully unfolded it, she realized she was holding a memo discussing plans to manipulate intelligence about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the event that had been used to justify escalating American military involvement in Vietnam. If authentic, this document alone would be historically significant, contradicting the official narrative that had been maintained for decades. And the tapes, who knew what conversations they contained? Olivia carefully returned everything to the box. She needed to think about what to do with this discovery. As a history teacher, her instinct was to ensure these materials were preserved and studied by proper authorities. But she also remembered Margaret's fear, her flight from Washington, her decades of silence. There had been reasons for her caution. Lost in thought, Olivia almost missed the sound of tires on gravel outside. She froze, listening intently. It was barely 7 a.m. Who would be visiting the abandoned Whitfield farm at dawn? Hurriedly, she closed the metal box and returned it to its hiding place, replacing the bricks carefully. She climbed the cellar stairs, closed the trapdoor, and slid the rug back into position just as a sharp knock sounded at the front door. Through the grimy window, Olivia could see 2 black SUVs parked in her driveway. 4 men in dark suits stood on her porch, their posture unmistakably official. One of them knocked again, more insistently. Taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart, Olivia smoothed her rumpled clothes and went to answer the door. As she opened it, the man in front held up an identification badge with the unmistakable Secret Service insignia. Ms. Olivia Reynolds? I'm Agent Thomas Davis with the United States Secret Service. We need to talk to you about Margaret Whitfield and what you may have found in this house. Olivia's blood ran cold. How could they possibly know? She had only discovered the journal yesterday, had told no one. Yet somehow, the moment she had uncovered evidence that could reshape historical narratives about a presidential administration, federal agents appeared at her door. "May I see that badge again, please?" she asked, buying time to collect her thoughts. The agent obliged, and she studied it carefully. It appeared genuine, but then she was hardly an expert on Secret Service identification. "What is this regarding?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's a matter of national security, Ms. Reynolds," Agent Davis replied. "May we come in?" Olivia hesitated. She had no legal grounds to refuse, and antagonizing federal agents seemed unwise. But she also felt a responsibility to the history Margaret Whitfield had risked so much to preserve. "Of course," she said finally, stepping back to allow them entry. "Though I should warn you, the house is in pretty bad shape. I just bought it yesterday." The agents filed in, their polished shoes and immaculate suits looking comically out of place in the dilapidated farmhouse. Agent Davis surveyed the dusty living room, while the others took positions near doorways, not quite blocking the exits, but definitely monitoring them. "Congratulations on your purchase," Davis said, his tone making it clear this was not a social call. "We understand you acquired this property at a county tax auction." "That's right," Olivia confirmed. "May I ask how you knew that? The sale was just finalized yesterday afternoon." Davis ignored her question. "Ms. Reynolds, our intelligence suggests that certain sensitive government materials may have been hidden on this property by its previous owner, Margaret Whitfield. Ms. Whitfield was a White House employee during the Johnson administration who left her position under unusual circumstances." Olivia's mind raced. They clearly knew about Margaret, but did they know exactly what she had hidden? And more importantly, how had they been alerted to Olivia's discovery so quickly? "I'm afraid I don't know anything about that," she said, the lie feeling foreign on her tongue. "As I mentioned, I just bought the place. I haven't even had a chance to fully explore it yet." Agent Davis studied her face, his expression revealing nothing. "Ms. Reynolds, you were a history teacher until recently, correct?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes, but how is that relevant?" "It's relevant because someone with your background would understand the significance of historical documents, particularly those relating to presidential administrations," Davis replied. "It also means you'd be more likely to investigate any historical artifacts you might find, rather than discarding them as junk." He wasn't wrong, but his knowledge of her professional background was unsettling. How thoroughly had they investigated her in the brief time since she'd purchased the property? "I'm going to be direct with you, Ms. Reynolds," Davis continued. "The materials Margaret Whitfield removed from the White House were classified. Their existence has been monitored by various government agencies for over 50 years. We have reason to believe she concealed them somewhere on this property before her death." "Monitored?" Olivia repeated, latching onto the strange word choice. "You've been watching an empty house for 5 decades? A flicker of something. Annoyance, perhaps, crossed Davis's face. Not continuously, no, but certain triggers were put in place. One of those triggers was activated yesterday when the property changed hands for the first time since Margaret Whitfield's death." Olivia's mind whirled with implications. They had been watching the property, waiting for someone to find what Margaret had hidden. But why? If the materials were as sensitive as Davis claimed, why not simply search the property themselves years ago? As if reading her thoughts, Davis added, "Legal constraints prevented a comprehensive search without specific cause. Ms. Whitfield's status as a former White House employee afforded her certain protections, even posthumously. But now that the property has transferred to you, and we have credible intelligence suggesting classified materials may be present, we have legal authority to conduct a search." "Do you have a warrant?" Olivia asked, the question escaping before she could consider its wisdom. Davis's expression hardened slightly. "We are prepared to obtain one if necessary, Ms. Reynolds. However, we were hoping you might cooperate voluntarily, given the national security implications." Olivia stood in her dilapidated living room, facing 4 Secret Service agents at dawn. her mind racing to process the implications. The metal box hidden beneath the root cellar suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. National security implications. What had Margaret Whitfield actually recorded? "I understand your concern," Olivia said carefully, "but as I mentioned, I've barely had time to explore the house. There's decades of accumulated junk here. I wouldn't even know where to begin looking for classified materials." Agent Davis studied her for a long moment. His eyes, a startling blue against his dark suit, missed nothing. "Perhaps we could help you look," he suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't actually a suggestion. "My team is specifically trained to identify items of interest without causing unnecessary damage to the property." Olivia glanced around at the peeling wallpaper and broken floorboards. "I appreciate your concern for the property," she said dryly, "but I'd like to understand exactly what you're looking for before I agree to anything." Davis hesitated, then nodded to one of his colleagues, who produced a tablet from inside his jacket. He tapped the screen a few times before handing it to Davis, who turned it toward Olivia. "This is Margaret Whitfield," he said, displaying a black-and-white photograph of a young woman in a modest 1960s dress standing outside the White House. She worked as a stenographer for the Johnson administration from 1966 to 1968, primarily transcribing meetings related to Vietnam policy. The resemblance between Margaret and Olivia was even more striking in this clear photograph than it had been on the ID badge. The same heart-shaped face, the same slightly upturned nose, the same determined set to the jaw. "She looks like you," Davis observed, watching Olivia's reaction closely. "Coincidence," Olivia said, though a chill ran down her spine. Was it mere chance that she'd been drawn to this particular property? That of all the abandoned houses in the county, she'd chosen the one with connections to a White House stenographer who could be her twin? Davis swiped to another image, an official memo with most of the text redacted. In November 1968, shortly after President Johnson announced he wouldn't seek re-election, several recording devices were discovered hidden in the cabinet room and Oval Office. The devices were traced to Ms. Whitfield, who had disappeared the previous day, along with several classified documents and audio recordings. Olivia's teaching instincts kicked in. The Johnson tapes are well-known historical records. The president recorded his own conversations for posterity. The official recordings, yes, Davis agreed. But Whitfield's devices captured conversations. When the president believed he wasn't being recorded, private discussions about Vietnam, election strategies, and other sensitive matters. She also took documents summarizing contingency plans for various military and diplomatic scenarios. That was over 50 years ago, Olivia pointed out. Surely whatever was recorded has been declassified by now. Some has, Davis acknowledged, but not all. National security doesn't have an expiration date, Ms. Reynolds. Certain strategies, certain approaches to international relations remain relevant regardless of the passing decades. One of the other agents, a woman with a severe haircut who had been silently examining the room, spoke up. "We have reason to believe Ms. Whitfield may have had personal connections in this area. Did you know her or any of her family members?" The question caught Olivia off guard. "No, I didn't. I'm not from Mapleton originally. I moved here for my teaching position 6 years ago." This wasn't entirely true. Olivia had been born in Mapleton, had spent her early childhood here before her parents moved to Connecticut for her father's job. But she'd never mentioned this to anyone in town, and she suddenly felt it was important to maintain that distance. "Interesting," the female agent said, in a tone suggesting she found it anything but. "Because our records indicate you're maternal." Grandmother was Eleanor Bennett, who grew up less than 5 miles from this property and attended high school with Margaret Whitfield. Olivia stared at her, genuine shock replacing her careful composure. Her grandmother Eleanor had indeed grown up in this county, but she died when Olivia was just 3. The family had rarely discussed her, and certainly never mentioned any connection to a White House stenographer who stole classified information. I didn't know that," she stammered. Agent Davis stepped closer. "Ms. Reynolds, I want to be very clear. The materials Margaret Whitfield removed from the White House remain classified. Their unauthorized possession constitutes a federal offense. If you've found anything, documents, recordings, photographs, that appears to be government property, you are legally obligated to turn it over." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Olivia's mind raced. The journal itself might not be classified. It was Margaret's personal writings, but the memo and tapes almost certainly were. And they were hidden beneath her kitchen floor at this very moment. "I understand," she said, buying time. "As I said, I've barely begun to go through the house. If I find anything that seems relevant, I'll certainly let you know." Davis studied her for another long moment, then handed her a business card. "We'll be in town for the next few days, conducting a thorough investigation into Ms. Whitfield's local connections. If you discover anything at all, call me immediately." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Ms. Reynolds. We'll need to station an agent on the property as a security precaution. Standard procedure." "You want to leave? Someone here?" Olivia asked, unable to hide her alarm. "That's not necessary. The house is barely habitable. Agent Cooper will remain outside in the vehicle," Davis interrupted, gesturing to one of his colleagues. "He won't disturb your renovations, but he will ensure the property remains secure." Olivia wanted to protest, but recognized the futility. This wasn't a request. It was a thinly veiled surveillance operation. "Fine," she conceded, "but I expect some privacy inside my own home." Davis nodded, apparently satisfied with this small victory. "Of course. We'll be in touch, Ms. Reynolds. Remember, any discoveries should be reported immediately." With that, 3 of the agents filed out, leaving the 4th, a younger man with a military-style haircut, behind. He nodded politely to Olivia before taking up position beside one of the SUVs, his attention fixed on the house. As soon as they left, Olivia sank onto the dusty sofa, her mind whirling. Her grandmother had known Margaret Whitfield. This couldn't be coincidence. There had to be a connection between Margaret, Eleanor, and the strange resemblance Olivia herself bore to the former stenographer. More urgently, she needed to decide what to do about the hidden materials. The rational choice would be to turn everything over to Agent Davis. These were, after all, government documents from half a century ago. What possible relevance could they have to her life? But something held her back. Margaret had risked everything to preserve these records, believing they contained truths the public deserved to know. As a history teacher, Olivia respected that conviction. History wasn't just about memorizing dates and events. It was about understanding the complex, often messy reality behind the sanitized narratives that made it into textbooks. With an agent stationed outside, retrieving the box from the root cellar was too risky. Instead, Olivia decided to focus on what she could safely examine: Margaret's journal, which she'd left hidden upstairs beneath her sleeping bag. Under the pretense of continuing her cleaning efforts, Olivia moved around the house, gathering dust and debris into a garbage bag while surreptitiously checking windows and sightlines. Agent Cooper remained by the SUV, occasionally walking the perimeter of the house, but never approaching the windows directly. Satisfied she had at least some privacy, Olivia retreated to the study where she'd spent the night and retrieved Margaret's journal. She needed to understand more about this woman and what had driven her to risk everything for these recordings. The journal entries painted a complex picture. Margaret Whitfield had joined the White House staff as a true believer in President Johnson's vision for America, particularly his domestic policies on civil rights and poverty reduction. Her disillusionment began gradually as she witnessed the growing disconnect between public statements about Vietnam and the private discussions among administration officials. March 15, 1967. Another bombing expansion approved today while the press was told operations remain unchanged. How many more young men will die for these lies? The deception seems to have no limits. As Margaret's concerns grew, so did her determination to document what she witnessed. She began secretly recording conversations, initially as a form of personal insurance, but eventually with the intention of exposing what she saw as deliberate deception of the American people. The most disturbing entries detailed conversations about manipulating intelligence reports to maintain public support for the war, discussions of political opponents being illegally surveilled, and strategies to undermine anti-war activists by infiltrating their organizations. September 3rd, 1968. Overheard J&H discussing the Chicago Convention violence. They were laughing about it. Actually laughing about American citizens being beaten while exercising their constitutional rights. This isn't the America I believed in. This isn't what I voted for. The final entries described Margaret's growing fear that her activities had been discovered, culminating in her decision to flee Washington with the evidence she'd collected. November 20th, 1968. Almost caught today. Secretary Dawson asked pointed questions about my access to the cabinet room. Must move quickly now. Grandmother's farm is the only safe place. They'll never connect Eleanor's property to me if I'm careful. The truth needs to survive, even if I don't. Olivia stared at the page, her breath catching. Grandmother's farm, Eleanor's property. The connection couldn't be clearer. Margaret Whitfield and Eleanor Bennett hadn't just known each other. They had been family, which meant Margaret was Olivia's great-aunt, or perhaps a more distant relative. The discovery sent Olivia diving back into the journal, searching for any mention of Eleanor. She found scattered references, birthday wishes, concerns about Eleanor's health, mentions of childhood memories they shared. These weren't just acquaintances, they had been close. But why had this family connection been erased? Why had Olivia never heard Margaret's name mentioned in family stories? A soft knock at the front door startled Olivia from her thoughts. She quickly hid the journal under her sleeping bag and went to answer, expecting Agent Cooper with some procedural question. Instead, she found an elderly woman standing on her porch, leaning heavily on a cane. She was well into her 80s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright, intelligent eyes that assessed Olivia with unmistakable recognition. "You look just like her," the woman said without preamble. "It's rather unsettling, actually." Olivia blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The woman shook her head. "No, but I knew Margaret and Eleanor, and I suspect you need to hear what I have to tell you, especially with those government types sniffing around again." She glanced pointedly at Agent Cooper, who was watching them with ill-concealed interest from beside his vehicle. "I'm Judith Harlow," the woman continued. "I taught history at Mapleton High for 43 years before retiring. Margaret and Eleanor were my students, back when this old place was still the Bennett family farm." The Bennett family farm. Not the Whitfield farm at all. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "Please come in," Olivia said, holding the door wider. As Judith passed, Olivia caught Agent Cooper's eye and gave him a reassuring wave, as if to say this was just a neighborly visit. Inside, Olivia cleared the dining room chairs of dust as best she could and offered one to Judith, who sank into it with a grateful sigh. "Not as spry as I once was," she said ruefully, "but my mind's still sharp, which is what matters today." She fixed Olivia with a penetrating stare. "You bought this place without knowing its history, didn't you?" "I knew it was called the Whitfield farm," Olivia replied carefully. Judith snorted. It was the Bennett place for 3 generations before Margaret married Richard Whitfield and took his name. Eleanor was her younger sister, your grandmother, I presume, given the resemblance. My grandmother was Eleanor Bennett Reynolds, Olivia confirmed, still processing this revelation. She died when I was very young. No one ever mentioned she had a sister named Margaret. I'm not surprised, Judith said grimly. After what happened in '68, the family did everything they could to distance themselves from Margaret. Changed. The property records avoided mentioning her name, eventually moved away entirely. She shook her head. Small towns have long memories, though. And I've been waiting a long time for someone from the Bennett line to return. Why? Olivia asked. Because Margaret entrusted me with something before she disappeared for good, Judith replied. Something I promised to keep safe, until either she returned or someone came who had the right to know. She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. Margaret said if anything happened to her, I should give this to a Bennett who came asking about family history. You haven't asked yet, but those Secret Service agents on your doorstep suggest it's time. Olivia accepted the envelope with trembling hands. The agents said Margaret stole classified documents and recordings from the White House. Is that true? Margaret would have said she preserved them, Judith corrected. She believed the American people had a right to know what was being done in their name. The complete truth about Vietnam, about domestic surveillance, about so many things the government wanted hidden. But why come back here? Olivia asked. Why hide everything at her childhood home? Because Eleanor offered sanctuary, Judith explained. The sisters were different as could be, Margaret idealistic and outspoken, Eleanor practical and private, but they were fiercely loyal to each other. When Margaret needed a safe haven, Eleanor provided it without question. What happened to Margaret? Olivia asked, dreading the answer. Judith's expression grew somber. No one knows for certain. She arrived here in November 1968, stayed for about a week while hiding her materials, then planned to leave for Canada. Eleanor received one postcard from Vancouver in January 1969. Then nothing. The family presumed she started a new life under a different name. And the government agents? They came a week after Margaret left, searched the house, questioned everyone in town, found nothing, of course. Margaret was too clever for that. They returned periodically for years afterward, especially whenever a new administration took office. Eventually, the visits stopped. Judith glanced toward the window. Until today. Olivia turned the envelope over in her hands, noticing it had never been sealed. Have you read this? No, Judith said firmly. That wasn't my place. Margaret was my student, then my friend, but this was for family alone. Olivia carefully opened the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The handwriting matched, the journal perfectly. To whoever finds this, likely a niece or nephew I'll never meet, if you're reading this, I never made it back to explain in person, and Judith has determined you have a right to know. What I've hidden on the Bennett farm isn't just historical evidence. It's proof of how fragile democracy becomes when power operates in shadows. The recordings document systematic deception about Vietnam, illegal surveillance of American citizens, and election interference that would shock even the most cynical observer. I preserved them not out of disloyalty to my country, but out of deep loyalty to its founding principles. You now face a choice I once faced. Reveal what you've found, and risk the consequences, or protect the secrets of powerful men at the expense of historical truth. Whatever you decide, remember that knowledge itself is neither good nor evil. It's how we use it that defines us. The map will lead you to everything. The most important materials are beneath the bell, a private joke between sisters about freedom. Ringing. Eleanor knows what this means. With hope for a more honest future, Margaret Whitfield. Olivia looked up from the letter, her mind connecting dots rapidly. The bell, the Liberty Bell reference in the riddle, that's what led me to the root cellar. Judith nodded. The old dinner bell. It hung from a post near the kitchen garden for 3 generations. Eleanor had it mounted on a concrete base. After the post rotted, said she couldn't bear to lose something that had called her family home for so many years. I haven't seen any bell on the property, Olivia said, frowning. The base is still there, on the east side of the house, Judith replied. The bell itself disappeared years ago, stolen by teenagers most likely. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Olivia, you need to understand what you're involved in now. Those men outside aren't just doing routine security work. If they suspect you found Margaret's materials, they won't leave until they have them. But these recordings are over 50 years old, Olivia protested. Surely they can't still be sensitive enough to justify this level of response. History doesn't exist in a vacuum, Judith said, the long-time teacher evident in her tone. The past shapes our understanding of the present. There are people alive today, powerful people, whose legacies would be destroyed by what Margaret documented. And there are policies still in place, approaches to foreign intervention and domestic surveillance, that were built on the foundations laid during that era. So what should I do? Olivia asked, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. That's not for me to say, Judith replied, rising slowly to her feet. Margaret believed in individual conscience above all else. She made her choice knowing the risks. Now you must make yours. She moved toward the door, then paused. But whatever you decide, remember you're not alone. Margaret wasn't the only one who believed in truth. After Judith left, Olivia stood at the window, watching Agent Cooper track the elderly woman's slow progress down the driveway before returning to his vigilant observation of the house. The situation was becoming increasingly complex. Not only had she discovered classified historical materials that the government was actively seeking, but she'd learned she was directly related to the woman who had hidden them, a woman who had potentially sacrificed everything to preserve what she believed was historical truth. The responsible thing would be to turn everything over to Agent Davis. Let the government determine what could be safely released to historians and what needed to remain classified. She was a history teacher, not an intelligence analyst. She had no way to determine what information might still be sensitive after 5 decades. But Margaret's words haunted her. Knowledge itself is neither good nor evil. It's how we use it that defines us. As a teacher, Olivia had always believed in the importance of historical accuracy, of understanding the complex, messy truth behind simplified narratives. She had encouraged her students to question official versions of events, to seek primary sources, to form their own conclusions based on evidence. Could she now surrender Margaret's evidence without even knowing what it contained, without ensuring it wouldn't simply disappear into government archives, classified for another 50 years? The discovery of her family connection to this house, to Margaret Whitfield, seemed too significant to be mere coincidence. Perhaps she had been drawn to this property for a reason, to complete what her great-aunt had started, to ensure that historical truth was preserved. Olivia moved to the kitchen and knelt beside the root cellar entrance. With Agent Cooper outside, retrieving the box was risky, but she needed to know exactly what she had found before making any decisions. Carefully, she lifted the trapdoor, mindful of the creaking hinges, and descended into the darkness once more. The cellar air was cool against Olivia's skin as she carefully made her way to the brick floor in the northeast corner. Working quickly but methodically, she pressed the cracked brick again and removed the center stone, retrieving the metal box she'd found earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed the combination 135 and lifted the lid. In the beam of her flashlight, the 5 reel-to-reel tapes gleamed, their plastic cases preserving them from the decades of dampness. Beside them lay the memo she'd glimpsed earlier. Official White House stationery with signatures at the bottom. Now she examined it more closely. The document was dated August 7, 1967, and detailed contingency plans for managing public perception of expanded bombing campaigns in North Vietnam. The language was clinical, discussing strategic narrative control and preemptive countering of opposition messaging. But the implications were clear. This was a blueprint for systematically misleading the American people about the escalation of a war that was already claiming thousands of lives. Among the signatures at the bottom, Olivia recognized names that had appeared in her history textbooks, men who had gone on to illustrious careers in politics, business, and academia after their White House service. Men whose legacies would be significantly altered if this document became public. Beneath the memo was something she hadn't noticed during her first rushed examination. A small notebook with transcription key written on the cover. Inside was a meticulous index of the tapes, listing dates, participants, and brief summaries of content. Margaret's neat handwriting labeled the most sensitive discussions with asterisks and exclamation points, creating a roadmap to the most explosive revelations. According to the key, the tapes contained discussions of election interference tactics, deliberate falsification of military progress reports, and strategies to undermine domestic opposition through infiltration and blackmail. If authentic, these recordings would force a re-evaluation of an entire era of American history. Olivia heard a floorboard creak overhead and froze. Was Agent Cooper coming inside? She listened intently, but no further sounds followed. Still, the reminder of his presence was enough to spur her to action. She couldn't examine the tapes here. She had no equipment to play them, and remaining in the cellar too long would arouse suspicion. Making a split-second decision, Olivia left the tapes and memo in the box, but took the transcription key, slipping it into her pocket before carefully replacing the center brick and ascending the cellar stairs. She needed more information before deciding what to do, and Margaret's detailed index would help her understand exactly what she was dealing with. Back in the kitchen, Olivia busied herself with continued cleaning efforts, occasionally glancing out the window to check on Agent Cooper. He remained by his vehicle, alternating between watching the house and speaking quietly into a communications device. Surveillance, not just security. As morning turned to afternoon, Olivia worked methodically through the house, establishing a visible pattern of renovation activities while her mind raced with plans and possibilities. She needed to understand not just what Margaret had hidden, but why these materials remained important enough for the Secret Service to appear within hours of her discovery. Most importantly, she needed someone she could trust, someone with the technical ability to verify the tape's authenticity and content without alerting the authorities. But who? She was new to Mapleton, with few deep connections beyond her former colleagues at the high school. Then she remembered. Daniel Chen, no relation despite sharing her surname, had been the school's technology teacher before budget cuts eliminated his position too. He had a background in audio engineering and a healthy skepticism of government overreach that he'd occasionally shared during lunch breaks. If anyone could help authenticate the tapes without immediately reporting them, it would be Daniel. The challenge would be contacting him without arousing suspicion. With Agent Cooper watching her every move, any unusual behavior would be noted and potentially reported back to Agent Davis. As if summoned by her thoughts, a second black SUV pulled into the driveway around 3 p.m. Agent Davis emerged, his manner even more formal than it had been that morning. He approached the house with purposeful strides, and Olivia met him at the door before he could knock. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her. "I hope your renovations are progressing well." "As well as can be expected," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "What can I do for you, Agent Davis?" "We've been conducting inquiries in town," he said, not bothering with pretense. "Several residents have mentioned that your grandmother, Eleanor and Margaret Whitfield, were sisters. You neglected to mention this connection during our earlier conversation." Olivia allowed genuine surprise to show on her face. "I only learned about it after you left." An elderly neighbor stopped by, Judith Harlow. She knew them both and filled me in on some family history I wasn't aware of. Davis's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Harlow? Yes, we've spoken with her as well. She was quite protective of her former student's privacy. She mentioned Margaret was her student before working at the White House." Olivia confirmed, offering the harmless portion of their conversation. "It sounds like they remained friends afterward." "Close enough that Margaret might have entrusted her with sensitive materials," Davis suggested, watching Olivia carefully. "You'd have to ask Ms. Harlow about that," Olivia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "She didn't mention anything of the sort to me." Davis nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Ms. Reynolds, given your newly discovered family connection to Margaret Whitfield, I need to be even more explicit. The materials we're seeking contain information that, even after 50 years, could compromise national security if made public. Their recovery is a matter of the highest priority." "I understand," Olivia said, "but as I told you this morning, I haven't found anything resembling classified documents. Just dust, mice, and broken furniture." "Perhaps you haven't looked in the right places," Davis suggested. "Margaret Whitfield was known for her creativity in hiding things. The root cellar, for instance, would be an ideal location for preserving sensitive materials long-term." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. They knew about the cellar, perhaps even about the brick floor. How much more did they know? "I haven't explored the cellar yet," she lied smoothly. "The entrance looks unstable, and I've been focusing on making the main living areas habitable first." Davis nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "We'd be happy to assist with a thorough search of the property. As I mentioned this morning, we have the expertise to conduct this efficiently and with minimal disruption." The offer, which wasn't really an offer at all, hung in the air between them. Olivia knew that accepting would mean the end of any chance to understand what Margaret had risked everything to preserve. But refusing outright would only increase their suspicion and potentially lead to a forced search with a warrant. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I'd prefer to handle the renovation and exploration at my own pace. If I discover anything that seems relevant to your investigation, you'll be my first call." Davis studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Very well, but I should inform you that we've requested a formal search warrant based on the historical connection between your family and Ms. Whitfield. We expect it to be approved by tomorrow morning." The message was clear. Cooperate now, or they'd return with legal authority to search every inch of the property. "That's your right," Olivia acknowledged, her mind racing ahead to what she needed to do before they returned. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate being able to continue my work without further interruption." Davis nodded curtly. "Agent Cooper will remain on site overnight as a security precaution. We'll return at 9 a.m. tomorrow, with or without the warrant." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Ms. Reynolds. We're monitoring all communications to and from this property. For your own safety, of course." The thinly veiled threat was clear. They were watching her phone, possibly her internet activity if she managed to get service established. Any attempt to reach out for help would be immediately flagged. As Davis drove away, Olivia returned to the house, her mind shifting into high gear. She had until 9 a.m. to decide what to do with Margaret's recordings, turn them over and let the government decide what history should know, or find a way to preserve them independently. The sun was beginning to set when Olivia spotted an unexpected opportunity. A local power company truck pulled up near the end of her driveway, and two workers in high-visibility vests emerged. They consulted a tablet, then began examining the utility pole at the edge of her property. Olivia casually stepped outside, wandering toward her car as if retrieving something while keeping an eye on Agent Cooper. He was engaged in what appeared to be a shift-change discussion with another agent who had just arrived, their attention momentarily diverted. Seizing her chance, Olivia approached the utility workers. "Having trouble with the lines?" she asked conversationally. The older of the two, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, looked up from his tablet. "Just routine maintenance, ma'am. System says there's been some voltage fluctuation in this area." "I just bought this place," Olivia explained, keeping her tone casual, while glancing back to confirm the agents were still distracted. "Hoping to get the power turned on soon, but there's so much to fix first." "Old Whitfield place, right?" the younger worker asked. "Heard it went at auction. Brave of you to take on such a project." Olivia lowered her voice, making a split-second decision. "I need help. Those government agents watching my house, they're not here for my protection." She quickly explained about Margaret's history and the materials hidden on the property. "I need to get a message to Daniel Chen, the former tech teacher at the high school. Can you help me?" The older worker glanced toward the agents, then back at Olivia. "My son had Mr. Chen for digital media. Good man. Got laid off same time you did if you're the history teacher." He hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "What's the message?" "Tell him I need his help with an audio restoration project. Family. Recordings from the 1960s. Tonight, if possible. He should come through the woods at the back of the property after dark. The agents are watching the road." The utility worker gave no indication he'd heard anything unusual, simply continuing to tap on his tablet. "We'll be checking connections up and down this road today. Might need to temporarily disconnect service to make repairs." He winked, almost imperceptibly. "Don't be surprised if your neighbors mention a visit from us." Olivia thanked them and returned to her car, retrieving a flashlight with deliberate casualness before heading back to the house. The agents had completed their changeover, with a new face now watching from beside the SUV. She waved politely, projecting an image of cooperative transparency, while her heart hammered in her chest. As darkness fell, Olivia continued working inside the house, keeping lights visible in the front rooms where the agent could observe her movements. She made a show of preparing a simple dinner on a camping stove, occasionally passing windows, to establish her presence. Around 10 p.m., she announced loudly that she was turning in for the night, making sure the agent saw her setting up her sleeping bag in the study before turning off the lights. Then in darkness she waited, listening to the house settle around her and the occasional movement of the agent outside as he patrolled the perimeter. Just after midnight, a soft tapping came at the back door. 3 gentle knocks, then 2 more. Olivia slipped through the darkened house, avoiding the windows visible from the front, and carefully opened the door. Daniel Chen stood on her back porch, dressed in dark clothing with a backpack slung over one shoulder. His expression was a mixture of curiosity and concern. "This is either the most elaborate prank ever," he whispered as she ushered him inside, "or you're in serious trouble, Olivia. The power company guy was pretty cryptic, but he made it sound urgent." "It is," she confirmed, leading him to the kitchen where they would be out of sight from the front windows. "And I'm sorry for the cloak and dagger approach, but those agents outside aren't just making a routine inquiry. They're actively monitoring me." By the light of a single candle placed low where it wouldn't be visible from outside, Olivia explained, Everything. Margaret Whitfield's history, the hidden recordings, the government's determination to recover them, and her own unexpected family connection to it all. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly serious. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. So, you've got potentially explosive historical evidence hidden in your root cellar, the Secret Service camped on your doorstep, and a warrant arriving in the morning, he summarized. And you called me because I need someone who understands both the technology and the stakes, Olivia explained. These tapes are 50 years old. I don't even know if they're still playable, and I need someone I can trust to help me figure out what to do with them. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, thinking, I've got equipment that could digitize the recordings, assuming they're intact. But Olivia, these are classified materials. Just possessing them could mean serious legal consequences. I know, she acknowledged. But if what Margaret documented is as significant as it appears, don't. We have a responsibility to ensure it isn't simply buried again. History isn't just what governments decide to tell us. It's what actually happened, messy and uncomfortable as that might be. The former tech teacher smiled slightly. You sound exactly like you did in faculty meetings, always the one reminding us why what we teach matters. He sighed, decision made. Okay, I'll help, but we need a plan that doesn't end with both of us in federal prison. Together, they descended into the root cellar, moving with exaggerated care to avoid any sound that might alert the agent outside. Olivia led Daniel to the brick floor and showed him how to access the hidden compartment. When he saw the box and its contents, Daniel let out a low whistle. Reel-to-reel in preservation cases. Your great-aunt knew what she was doing. He examined the tapes carefully, using the light from his phone to check their condition. They look intact, which is remarkable after 50 years. The cases protected them from moisture and temperature fluctuations. Can you play them? Olivia asked. Not here, he replied. I'd need my equipment, which is back at my apartment, but I might be able to. He trailed off, thinking, then began rummaging in his backpack. He produced a small device about the size of a deck of cards. It's a field recorder, high-end, with enough storage to capture several hours of audio. If we can't get the tapes out before the agents return with their warrant, we can at least document that they exist and record the accompanying materials. While Daniel photographed the memo and Margaret's transcription key, Olivia kept watch. At the cellar stairs, listening for any indication that the agent had noticed something amiss. The house remained quiet, the only sounds the occasional settling of old timbers and the wind outside. There's one more thing, Olivia said, as they carefully replaced the tapes in their hidden compartment. Margaret's letter mentioned that the most important materials are beneath the bell. We've found what was hidden under the dinner bell, but there might be more elsewhere on the property. Daniel considered this. The old church bell, maybe? Judith mentioned this was originally the Bennett family farm. Was there a family chapel or anything like that? Olivia shook her head. Not that I've seen. But the property map in Margaret's journal showed several locations marked with X's. We've found what was at one of them, but there are at least 3 others. Back upstairs, they spread the property map on the kitchen floor, studying it by candlelight. Besides the mark near the house where they'd found the root cellar hiding place, X's were visible near the old well, at the corner of the barn, and at the edge of the woods. We need to check these locations before the agents return. With their warrant, Olivia said. If there's additional evidence hidden on the property, I want to know about it before deciding what to do. Daniel nodded, checking his watch. It's nearly 1 a.m. We've got about 8 hours before they're likely to return. The barn and well are too exposed. The agent would spot us with flashlights out there, but we might be able to reach the woods if we're careful. They formulated a plan. Olivia would create a distraction at the front of the house while Daniel slipped out the back and made his way to the wooded area at the edge of the property. Once there, he would search for whatever Margaret might have hidden, using the rough measurements from the map as a guide. "What kind of distraction?" Daniel asked. Olivia smiled grimly. "I think it's time I express some outrage about federal agents camping on my property. Nothing creates cover like righteous indignation." True to her word, Olivia marched out the front door at 1:30 a.m., flashlight in hand, and approached the agent with a determined stride. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I understand you're doing your job, but I can't sleep knowing there's someone watching my house. It's creepy and invasive." The agent, a different man from the one who had arrived with Davis, straightened from his relaxed posture against the SUV. "Ma'am, I'm just here to ensure the security of potential government property." At 1:30 in the morning? Olivia challenged, channeling the frustration she genuinely felt into her performance. "This is harassment, and my lawyer will hear about it tomorrow." As she engaged the agent in increasingly heated discussion, keeping his attention firmly fixed on her, Daniel slipped out the back door and disappeared into the darkness, making his way toward the tree line marked on Margaret's map. Olivia kept up her distraction for nearly 20 minutes, demanding the agent's name and badge number, threatening to call local police, and generally making herself as memorably difficult as possible without crossing any lines that might lead to her detention. Finally, she huffed dramatically and returned to the house, slamming the door with theatrical emphasis. Now came the waiting. Olivia moved around the house, keeping lights on and visible movement in the windows to maintain the impression she was too agitated to sleep. In reality, she was watching for Daniel's return, anxiety growing with each passing minute. It was nearly 3 a.m. when a soft tapping at the back door signaled his return. Olivia rushed to let him in, noting immediately his mud-covered clothes and the excitement in his eyes. "I found it," he whispered, following her back to the kitchen. Exactly where the map indicated, at the base of an old oak tree. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small metal container, similar to the one from the root cellar, but more weathered from exposure to the elements. Unlike the cellar box, this one had no combination lock, just a simple latch that had been sealed with what looked like candle wax. Daniel had already broken the seal during his examination in the woods. He opened it now, revealing its contents to Olivia. Inside was a single microcassette tape, the type used in dictation machines during the 1960s and 70s, and a handwritten note in Margaret's distinctive script. "This is the only copy of the final conversation, recorded November 3rd, 1968. If the other materials are ever questioned or discredited, this will confirm their authenticity. Eleanor knows the truth." Daniel carefully removed the microcassette. "This is older technology than the reel-to-reel tapes, but simpler to play back. I actually have a compatible device at home. They're still used in some legal offices for dictation." "Can you make a copy?" Olivia asked, an idea forming. "I can digitize it," Daniel confirmed, "but we need to decide what to do with all of this before those agents return with their warrant. Once they start searching in earnest, they'll find the hidden compartment in the cellar." Olivia nodded, her decision crystallizing. "I'm not going to destroy historical evidence, no matter how uncomfortable it might make certain people. But I'm also not going to martyr myself for this cause." She outlined her plan, watching as Daniel's expression shifted from concern to cautious approval. "It could work," he acknowledged when she finished, "but the timing would have to be perfect." "Then we'd better get started," Olivia said, checking her watch. "We have less than 6 hours before Agent Davis returns, and a lot to accomplish before then." Together, they bent over the kitchen table, finalizing their strategy by candlelight, While outside, the Secret Service agent continued his vigilant watch, unaware that the very evidence he was stationed to protect was already being prepared for a journey he couldn't prevent. As dawn broke over the Whitfield farm, Olivia surveyed her handiwork with grim satisfaction. The past 3 hours had been a flurry of careful preparation, executed in near silence to avoid alerting the agent outside. Daniel had left an hour earlier, taking with him digital copies of the transcription key, the White House memo, and most importantly, the microcassette from the woods. Now, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee brewed on her camping stove, waiting for the inevitable arrival of Agent Davis and his team. The waiting was the hardest part. The quiet moments when doubt could creep in, when she could question whether she was making the right choice or merely being swept along by events set in motion decades before her birth. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had faced a similar choice when her sister appeared on her doorstep in November 1968, desperate and afraid, but determined to preserve what she believed was historical truth. She had chosen family loyalty and moral principle over legal obligation. Now, 50 years later, Olivia found herself at the same crossroads. The sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway pulled her from her thoughts. Through the kitchen window, she watched 3 black SUVs pull up, discharging Agent Davis and 5 other agents in crisp, dark suits. They conferred briefly before approaching the house, their manner suggesting this would not be a social call. Olivia opened the door before they could knock, coffee mug in hand. "Good morning, Agent Davis. I see you brought reinforcements." Davis nodded curtly, holding up an official-looking document. "Ms. Reynolds, this is a federal warrant authorizing us to search these premises for classified materials removed from the White House by Margaret Whitfield in 1968. I trust you'll cooperate fully." "Of course," Olivia replied with deliberate pleasantness. "I have nothing to hide. Coffee?" The agent's eyes narrowed slightly at her changed demeanor, but he simply shook his head. "We'll begin with the main house, focusing on areas likely to preserve sensitive materials long-term. Agent Wilson will document all findings." He gestured to a woman with a camera and tablet. "Where would you like to start?" Olivia asked, maintaining her cooperative facade. "The root cellar," Davis replied without hesitation. Historical records indicate it was a feature of the original Bennett family home, making it one of the oldest parts of the property. Olivia's heart skipped a beat despite her careful preparation. They knew exactly where to look. "Of course, it's through the kitchen." She led the way, watching as the agent spread through her house with practiced efficiency. In the kitchen, she moved aside the rug, covering the cellar entrance, and pulled up the heavy door. "The stairs are steep," she warned, "and the ceiling's low." Davis nodded to 2 of his colleagues, who descended with flashlights drawn. He followed, with Olivia close behind. The cramped space quickly filled with agents, examining every inch of the stone walls and dirt floor. It took them less than 5 minutes to find the section of brick flooring in the northeast corner. "This construction is different from the rest," one agent observed, kneeling to examine it more closely. "Newer bricks, different mortar." Davis shot Olivia a sharp look. "You didn't mention this feature when we spoke yesterday." "I told you I hadn't explored the cellar," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "It was dark, and I was focused on making the living spaces habitable." The agent, examining the bricks, had already discovered the mechanism. With a soft click, the center brick loosened, and he lifted it out to reveal the hollow space beneath. Davis knelt down, reaching into the cavity to extract the metal box. "Interesting," he said, his tone deceptively casual as he examined the combination lock. "Do you happen to know the combination, Ms. Reynolds?" Olivia shook her head. "I've never seen that box before." Davis gave her a long, evaluating look before turning to one of his colleagues. "Get the portable decoder from the vehicle." 10 minutes later, they had the box open. Davis's expression remained impassive as he examined the contents. The 5 reel-to-reel tapes in their preservation cases, exactly as Olivia and Daniel had left them. "These appear to be the Whitfield recordings," he confirmed, passing them to Agent Wilson for documentation. "We'll need to verify their authenticity, but the labeling matches our records." Olivia feigned surprise. "Those are the classified materials you've been looking for? Old tapes?" "Among other items," Davis replied, continuing to search the box. His brow furrowed slightly. "The inventory indicated additional documents should be present." "Perhaps they didn't survive the decades in storage," Olivia suggested, "or maybe they're hidden elsewhere on the property." "Perhaps," Davis agreed, though his tone suggested skepticism. He turned to his team. "Continue the search. Focus on other locations Margaret Whitfield might have considered secure. The well, the barn, any root systems of old trees on the property." For the next 3 hours, Olivia watched as the agents methodically searched every inch of her property. They found the disturbed earth where Daniel had recovered the microcassette from beneath the oak tree, but whatever container had held it had been carefully reburied, leaving no evidence of what it had contained. By midday, Davis's frustration was evident despite his professional demeanor. They had recovered the tapes, but not the supporting documents that would provide context and authentication. "Ms. Reynolds," he said finally, as the team regrouped in her living room, "I believe you haven't been entirely forthcoming with us. The materials we've recovered are significant but incomplete. Our intelligence indicates additional documents were hidden with the recordings." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I've allowed you complete access to my property, Agent Davis. I've answered your questions honestly. If there were additional materials, I have no knowledge of them." It wasn't technically a lie. The documents had been here, but they weren't anymore. Davis studied her for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes. "The tapes we've recovered contain sensitive discussions between high-ranking government officials during a critical period in American history. Their unauthorized possession or dissemination would constitute a serious federal offense." "I understand," Olivia said, "but as you've seen for yourself, they were hidden on this property long before I purchased it. I had no knowledge of their existence until you arrived looking for them." Again, not technically a lie, Davis seemed to come to a decision. "We'll be taking the recovered materials for analysis. As the current property owner, you'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding everything you've witnessed today." "Is that really necessary?" Olivia asked, injecting just the right note of innocent confusion into her voice. "I'm just a former history teacher who bought an old house. I don't know anything about classified recordings or White House secrets." "It's standard procedure," Davis insisted, nodding to Agent Wilson, who produced a document from her briefcase. "This agreement simply confirms you understand the sensitive nature of what's been recovered here and will not discuss it with unauthorized individuals." Olivia accepted the document, reading it carefully. The legal language was dense, but the implications were clear. By signing, she would be legally barred from ever discussing Margaret Whitfield's recordings or their contents, under penalty of federal prosecution. "What happens to the tapes now?" she asked, pen poised above the signature line. "They'll be transferred to a secure facility for authentication and analysis," Davis replied. "Given their historical significance, portions may eventually be declassified and made available to scholars following the standard review process." "And how long does that standard review process typically take?" Olivia pressed. Davis's expression remained neutral. "That varies depending on the sensitivity of the content. Some materials from the Johnson administration have already been declassified. Others remain sealed." "For 50 years, Olivia observed, and could remain sealed for 50 more. A flicker of impatience crossed Davis's face. Ms. Reynolds, our concern is national security, not historical curiosity. These recordings may contain information that remains relevant to ongoing operations and international relationships. Their proper handling is not a matter for debate. Olivia nodded slowly, then signed the document. She had no intention of discussing the tapes themselves. That wasn't part of her plan. As the agents packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Davis approached her one final time. We'll be monitoring this situation, Ms. Reynolds. Any attempt to discuss what transpired here today would violate your agreement and trigger immediate legal consequences. I understand, Olivia assured him, walking him to the door. I'm just glad this is resolved. I can finally focus on renovating my house without federal agents camping in my driveway. Davis gave her one last searching look before joining his team in the SUVs. Olivia stood on the porch, watching until the vehicles disappeared down the long driveway, the cloud of dust they raised slowly settling in the midday sun. Only when they were completely gone did she allow herself to breathe. Normally again, the first phase of her plan had succeeded. The agents had found exactly what they expected to find, no more and no less. Now came the more challenging part. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to Daniel. Visitors have left. Package delivered as expected. His reply came moments later. Dinner at Judith's at 7, bringing mutual friends. Olivia spent the remainder of the day continuing her cleaning efforts, but with genuine purpose now. If this house was to be her home, and after everything that had transpired, she felt connected to it in ways she couldn't have anticipated. It needed serious attention. By late afternoon, she had cleared most of the debris from the first floor and begun cataloguing the repairs that would be necessary to make the place truly livable. As sunset approached, she showered using the camp system she'd rigged in the bathroom, changed into fresh clothes, and drove into town for her meeting at Judith's house. She took a circuitous route, watching for any sign of surveillance, but the black SUVs seemed to have truly departed. Judith's home was a tidy Victorian on Mapleton's Main Street, its well-maintained exterior a sharp contrast to the dilapidated farmhouse. The elderly teacher answered Olivia's knock with a warm smile, ushering her into a living room where Daniel already waited, along with two people Olivia didn't recognize, a woman about her age with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor, and an older man whose face seemed vaguely familiar. Olivia, meet Catherine Weber from the National Security Archive at George Washington University, Judith introduced, and Professor James Harlow, my husband and former chair of American History at State. Judith's message suggested you've made a discovery of potential historical significance, Catherine said after pleasantries were exchanged. Something connected to the Johnson administration and Vietnam? Olivia glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. More than a discovery, she confirmed. I've found evidence that could significantly alter our understanding of how the Vietnam War was presented to the American people. Over the next hour, she explained everything. Margaret Whitfield's position in the White House, the secret recordings, the documented plans to manipulate public perception of the war, and the government's 50-year effort to recover the evidence. The agents found and confiscated the original tapes this morning, she concluded, but not before we were able to document their existence and content. Daniel opened his laptop, displaying the photographs he'd taken of Margaret's transcription, key, and the White House memo. We also have this, he added, producing a small flash drive, a digital copy of what appears to be a conversation between President Johnson and his advisors 3 days before the 1968 election, discussing strategies to undermine peace negotiations in order to influence the outcome. Catherine Weber examined the evidence with professional detachment asking precise questions about provenance and chain of custody. Professor Harlow, meanwhile, grew increasingly animated as he recognized the historical implications. "If authenticated," he said, his voice reverent, "this would provide concrete evidence for what historians have long suspected but never been able to prove conclusively. The deliberate prolonging of the war for political advantage cost thousands of American and Vietnamese lives. The question," Catherine interjected, "is what to do with this evidence now. The National Security Archive specializes in declassifying and publishing government documents through FOIA requests and legal challenges. But this material was obtained through unorthodox channels." Margaret Whitfield believed the American people had a right to know what was being done in their name, Olivia said. "She risked everything to preserve this evidence. I believe we have a responsibility to ensure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "There are legal pathways for this kind of historical whistleblowing, especially given the time that's elapsed. My organization has experience navigating these waters." She turned to Daniel. "I assume you've secured copies of everything?" "Multiple copies," he confirmed, "stored securely in various locations. If anything happens to one, others remain accessible." "Smart," Catherine approved. "The government's primary tactic in these situations is to seize and classify everything, then drag out the review process indefinitely. Having secured copies gives us leverage." "What about the non-disclosure agreement?" Olivia asked. "I signed a document today promising not to discuss the tapes or their discovery." Catherine smiled slightly. "NDAs regarding matters of public interest have limited enforceability, especially when the information pertains to historical events with significant implications for our understanding of government conduct. But we'll need to move carefully. The first step is authentication." "I can help with that," Professor Harlow offered. "I've worked extensively with Johnson administration records. I can verify whether the conversations align with known events and participants." As the discussion continued into the evening, a plan emerged. Catherine would take the evidence back to Washington, where her team would authenticate it and prepare a legal strategy for its release. Professor Harlow would provide historical context and verification. Daniel would serve as the technical expert, confirming the recordings hadn't been altered. And Olivia, as Margaret's relative and the property owner, would be the connective thread, the person who had discovered the truth and chosen to bring it to light. "It won't be easy," Catherine warned as the meeting concluded. "The government will fight this every step of the way. They'll question the authenticity of the evidence, the legality of its acquisition, and your motivations in releasing it. Are you prepared for that?" Olivia thought about her life 6 months ago, the comfortable routine of teaching, the security of knowing exactly what each day would bring. She thought about the desperation that had driven her to spend her last $1,000 on an abandoned farmhouse. And she thought about Margaret Whitfield, who had sacrificed her career and possibly her life to preserve what she believed was historical truth. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty, "some things are worth fighting for." As spring turned to summer, the Whitfield farmhouse, or the Bennett place, as Olivia now thought of it, underwent a transformation. With Catherine Weber's connections, Olivia secured a grant from a historical preservation society to restore the property as a significant site in Cold War history. Local contractors replaced the roof, repaired the structural damage, and updated the electrical and plumbing systems. Meanwhile, in Washington, the process of authenticating and preparing Margaret's evidence moved forward with careful precision. Professor Harlow confirmed that the conversations matched known events and participants from the Johnson administration. Audio experts verified the recordings hadn't been tampered with, and Catherine's legal team built a case for public disclosure, based on historical significance and the public's right to know. The government, as predicted, fought back. Justice Department lawyers argued the materials remained classified despite their age. They questioned the chain of custody, suggesting the recordings could have been altered or fabricated. They even attempted to enforce Olivia's non-disclosure agreement, sending stern letters threatening legal consequences if she persisted. But the carefully constructed network of historians, archivists, and legal experts held firm. When official channels stalled, Catherine released a report detailing the discovery and its significance, capturing the attention of major news outlets. Public pressure mounted for transparency, for acknowledging the historical record, for honoring Margaret Whitfield's courage in preserving it. 6 months after the Secret Service appeared at dawn on Olivia's doorstep, a federal judge ruled that the materials should be declassified and made available to researchers, citing their profound historical significance and the public's compelling interest in understanding this critical period in American history. On a crisp autumn day, Olivia stood on the porch of the fully restored farmhouse, watching as workers installed a historical marker near the driveway. The bronze plaque read, "The Bennett Whitfield Farm Home of Margaret Whitfield, 1926 unknown." White House stenographer, whose courage preserved crucial historical evidence of government decision-making during the Vietnam War. Her recordings, hidden here for over 50 years, have expanded our understanding of this pivotal era in American history. "She would be proud," Judith said, joining Olivia on the porch, "not just of the recognition, but of you, for carrying forward her belief that historical truth matters." "I wonder what happened to her," Olivia mused. "Whether she ever knew the impact she would have. Some people plant trees knowing they'll never sit in the shade," Judith replied. "Margaret was one of those people, and now so are you." Inside the farmhouse, what had once been the formal dining room had been transformed into a small museum space, documenting Margaret's story and the historical significance of her recordings. The center display held a photograph Judith had provided, Margaret and Eleanor as young women, standing arm in arm on this very porch, their expressions reflecting the unshakable bond between sisters. Beside it was a modern photo of Olivia in the same spot, the family resemblance unmistakable across generations. The accompanying text explained how a desperate purchase had led to an extraordinary discovery, how a teacher with nothing left to lose had found not just a home, but a purpose, a connection to the past and a responsibility to the future. In the corner, a vintage reel-to-reel player allowed visitors to listen to excerpts from Margaret's recordings, now fully declassified and part of the National Historical Record. Her voice, introducing each session, carried the same quiet determination that had driven her to risk everything for what she believed was right. As the first tour group explored the museum, Olivia slipped away to her private living quarters in the renovated second floor. On her desk sat a framed letter, the final communication from Margaret to Eleanor, postmarked Vancouver, January 1969. "Dearest Elle, the snow here reminds me of winters at the farm. I miss home more than I can say, but we both know I can never return. What matters is that the truth remains preserved where you've hidden it. Someday, when it's safe, the right person will find it. Someone with the courage to use it wisely. Until then, remember that some choices echo through generations. Yours kept me safe. Mine might someday help others understand what really happened. Together, we've done what we could with the moment history gave us. All my love, M." Olivia traced the faded handwriting with her finger, feeling the connection across time and bloodlines. Her desperate $1,000 purchase hadn't just given her shelter when she needed it most. It had given her the chance to complete what Margaret had started, to ensure that one woman's courage wasn't forgotten, and to add her own small chapter to the ongoing story of truth in history. The condemned farmhouse that had once represented her lowest point had become not just her home, but her purpose. A bridge between past and future, a testament to the idea that sometimes our most desperate decisions lead us exactly where we need to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.